Hey there, it's Marley. Welcome to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap up, so talking about all the books I read in the month of June. So before we get into the book reviews, let's quickly just look at a little overview of my stats for June. To be honest, I did not finish my TBR, which I'm a little bit upset about. Last month, I think it was Colors picked my TBR, and so I am still in the middle of the Iron Raven, which I ended up picking based on the color of the cover, it being this yellow. So I did not finish this book in time, but I did end up reading 7 books in June, or at least completing them, which was about 2,465 pages. So definitely less than normal, unfortunately. There was just, I guess, a lot going on this month. I didn't reach all my reading goals. Hours listened was 11 because I did read 1 audiobook this month. My average rating was 4 stars, so at least that was good. My average rating is actually quite good. Books acquired was 2. All right, then we have a little bit of a mix of genres here. The top 2 genres were fantasy and romance. I read 2 fantasies and 2 romance. Then 1 thriller, 1 horror, and 1 nonfiction. I think this is my first nonfiction that I have read this year. Yeah, and then for format, as I said, I read 1 audiobook, and then it was split between physical and ebook, 3 and 3. I mainly read adult books this month, 6 adult books, and then only 1 young adult. And for author genders, it was a little bit closer than usual this month. We had 4 female authors and 3 male authors. I had read from 4 of the authors before, but I had 3 new authors that I had never read from before. And then for year published, I read 2 books that came out this year in 2024, 2 from 2023, and 2 from 2022. So mostly new releases, and then just 1 from 2012. So all right, let's get into the book reviews, starting out with the nonfiction, just because I decided not to rate this book. So I just thought I would talk about it first. This was the audiobook. It's called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might know I'm more new to audiobooks, and thus far I had only been listening to audiobooks in like 1 sitting, where I was just kind of sitting at home and I would just binge a whole audiobook while I colored or painted or something like that. I decided to do a different tactic with this audiobook and listen to it throughout, I think throughout the whole month or longer. I was listening to it when I was out and about, when I was commuting on the subway and stuff like that. So it was a little bit more spread out and a different experience. And I did not really like this experience. I feel like I was very distracted and I didn't fully get the full experience of reading this book. So that is why I'm choosing not to rate it. Not because it's a nonfiction or anything like that, just because I didn't feel like I got the full best experience, because I kept getting distracted when I was out and about and missing certain chunks of the book. So I think I am no longer going to be listening to audiobooks this way, and I'll have to just go back to the old way of listening to them at home when I really can concentrate. But enough about that. This book is talking about kind of introverts versus extroverts, quiet people versus louder people, and just kind of how in society we really value having more of an extroverted, outgoing personality. That is looked upon as a good thing, and how being introverted and quieter kind of got this negative connotation to it. And so it looked at the history of that. It looked at some different examples of people who were introverted and were still really successful. It looks at just a lot of science and experiments that have been done on introverts versus extroverts. I did overall find it interesting, but again, I don't think I got the full experience from it. I think I would overall recommend it if you're interested in learning about this topic, or if you are introverted, as maybe some motivation of, look, there are successful introverts out there and what you can do, kind of fake it till you make it kind of thing in this world that really values extroverts. So as a shyer, introverted person myself, it was interesting, but I just wish my experience with this book could have been better. I wish I picked it up physically. All right, next up was my book club book that I have with my friends, and it was The Husbands by Holly Gramazio, and I give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. This was a pretty unique, interesting book. It's kind of contemporary fiction, but also with some magical realism. It's pretty popular, so you may have already heard of it. It's about this woman who's living in this flat on her own in in, I think it was London. I know it is like a British book. All of a sudden, like she's a single woman, but all of a sudden this man comes down from her attic and he is like apparently her husband. And she looks at her phone and she sees the proof of it, that they have wedding photos and all this stuff. It's like she's gone to this alternate universe where she has a husband. And so she's really freaked out. She just kind of goes along with it. The husband ends up going back up into the attic, and then a new husband comes down. And basically she gets into this cycle where like every time a husband goes back up into the attic, a new one will come down. And she's testing out all these different lives with these different husbands, because every time a new husband comes, like her whole life changes. Like sometimes she has a different job, sometimes she has different friends, a different situations, just based on the husband that she's with. So it's kind of like a philosophical kind of thing where I feel like it's trying to say like, you know, we have so many different choices that can like affect what our life ends up being, right? There was so many different guys she could have decided to marry, and this is what her life would have looked like with each of them. And how do you choose which one is the best? Like, do you choose what's the best for you? What's the best for your family? Because sometimes her family was in different situations. It was interesting, and it was overall pretty fun. Like, it has that classic British kind of humor and quirkiness to it. But obviously with my rating, like, it wasn't my favorite. I do think it got a little bit repetitive, and I kind of wish maybe that the ending could have been a bit better. I don't know. I did overall like the message that this book had. I did overall like it, but not enough for it to be like a 4 or 5 star where I actively like really loved it. So if it's piques your interest, I would, you know, consider checking it out, but it could have been better. Another book that I rated 3.5 stars is the new Riley Sager book, Middle of the Night. I did upload a full reading vlog for this book this month, but it was spoilery. So if you have not read this book yet, then don't watch that video. But if you have read it, then go check it out to see my like in real time thoughts and theories and stuff like that. Obviously, with the fact that I rated this less than 5 stars, less than 4 stars, I was a little bit disappointed. Riley Sager is one of my favorite thriller authors, and I have rated a lot of his books 5 stars, but I've also rated them 4s and 3s. This is definitely not one of my top favorites, but again, similar to The Husbands, if it kind of piques your interest, if you've liked his other books, then you know it's worth checking out. This is following our first male protagonist from Riley. His name was Ethan, and basically when he was a kid, you know, he lived on this cul-de-sac with his family. He had some friends in the neighborhood. He ended up camping with his best friend, and his best friend was like abducted in the night. Like, he disappeared, and he's been missing for the last 30 years. He was never found. His body was never found, anything like that. Ethan has really been plagued by the trauma of this for his whole life. But when his parents are selling their house on the cul-de-sac, he comes back to this town. There's some little like suspicious, haunting things happening where he thinks maybe his friend is still around, and we're basically diving into like what really happened to his best friend. We are getting flashbacks. We're hearing from a bunch of different characters in the neighborhood, and then we're obviously seeing present day where some weird things are going on as well. So the reason that this disappointed me a little bit is I do think a lot of it was predictable. I don't think there was a ton of twists, and the ones we had like weren't that shocking. Still had the classic Riley Sager writing that had me reading the whole day. I read this in less than 24 hours like I always do with his books, so I did obviously quite enjoy it to a certain extent. But just compared with his last couple releases that really got to me, this one just didn't quite live up to that. So I don't know, like if you were someone that hated his last couple releases, maybe you would like this one. Then it's a little bit more toned down. I find it's not as crazy as his last couple, so maybe some people actually would enjoy this more, but it probably is my second least favorite of his books. I think Final Girls, or whatever that one is, would probably be last still, and then this one. So all right, another book I read this month, and I'm glad I read this during Pride, is The Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. This is another one I picked because of the color picks my TBR. This is the author of Cemetery Boys, which is a book I really loved last year. And I also really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. This is based on like mythology and gods. We have our main character, Teo, who is the son of the like bird goddess in this world. So that's why he has wings. He is also also trans, so that is also a main focus of the book. There's a lot of trans and LGBT rep in this story. But anyways, in this world, there are these Sunbearer trials that happen every 10 or 20 years or something like that. It's always the gold gods that enter in this competition. There's always a loser who gets sacrificed, and that is what kind of keeps their world going and keeps their world safe. And then there's the winner who's kind of like idolized or whatever. Teo is actually a jade, so he's not one of like the top gods, but for whatever reason, he ends up getting chosen to participate in the Sunbearer trials. So it's not looking great for him because, you know, he didn't have the same training and stuff as the other demigods, I should say. The main characters are all demigods. So it's kind of like he's the underdog in this competition. It's very fun. Like, Aiden Thomas is very funny. It's very entertaining. I said in my Goodreads review, it does remind me of like the Percy Jackson, Rick Riordan books. Just the fact that it's dealing with, you know, gods, demigods, there are these trials, and it does have this great sense of humor. I think if you were a fan of those books back in the day, then consider checking out this book. There is going to be, I think, one more book in the series. It's a duology, and there was quite a cliffhanger in this. There was a twist at the end, there's lots of action. It does have some darkness to it as well. It's not only lighthearted, like there is definitely some serious stuff going on, but I did overall enjoy this book. All right, another book I quite enjoyed was Book of a Night by Holly Black, which I believe is quite an unpopular opinion. Of course, Holly Black is known for a lot of her young adult fantasy books. A lot of them have to do with fairies. This was her adult debut, and I'll admit at first it took me a little while to get into it, but then I was actually loving it, and I did give this one 4 stars as well. We have our main character who was Charlie, yes, and honestly Charlie and her character was one of the things that made this book so enjoyable. There were certain things with like the world building that maybe weren't like perfect, but I do just think it was so fun to read Charlie's story. So basically she grew up in like not a great kind of family situation, and she ended up getting trained to be like a little scam artist as a kid. So she has these kind of scamming talents, and she kind of continues to do this as an adult to get money and stuff like that. There's also this fantasy element where there are people who have shadow powers, and there's a number of different shadow powers you can have. I'll admit I never quite fully grasped all of it, but like people can manipulate their shadows to look differently. They can send their shadows off to like do tasks for them, stuff like that. Kind of the goal of this book is to get their hands on the Book of Night. Charlie is kind of tasked with getting her hands on that book. That is like a job that she has. And anyways, it kind of goes off from there, but I just found it so entertaining. I loved Charlie. She has, you know, a sister. She has a romance in this book. There's a bunch of different kind of relationships going on with her. And it was really interesting hearing about her past and how she became the way she is now. As I said, some of the shadow stuff wasn't fully explained the best, but by the end I feel like it kind of did all come together. There's action, there's twists, there's, as I said, romance. Like, I actually did quite enjoy this book, so I would overall recommend it. I know I've been hearing a lot of mixed things. I can understand why people didn't absolutely love it, but I think if you are a character driven reader and you really connect with Charlie, then you will like this. And I should say I read that book for my reading vlog for the month, where I read some of my favorite booktubers' favorite books. So definitely go check out that vlog if you have not already, because my top 3 books of the month were actually from that vlog. So it was very successful. So next up, I read Monstrilio, again for that vlog. And this was a book that went out of my comfort zone a little bit, but I actually ended up really enjoying it and giving it 4 stars. And I will just say this was also a perfect book to read during Pride. There was a lot of queer rep in this book as well, if you want to put it on your TBRs for the future. But this is following a husband and wife. They have a child, Santiago, and he ends up dying because he has this lung condition. So they're devastated, and basically the mother takes a piece of his lung just to like kind of have, I guess. And then when she goes back to Mexico, where she's from, she hears about the story of someone else kind of nurturing an organ of like a deceased person and then it growing into like a new person. So she decides to do that with a piece of her son's lung. She starts like feeding it, nurturing it. It starts becoming like a living little creature, a little monstrilio as they call it. And so we see some different points of view throughout the book. We see the mom, the dad, a friend of the family, and it's obviously very much exploring like topics of grief and stuff like that. And it also just has this weird little horror element of this little monstrilio that obviously is causing a bit of havoc. But I'll admit it goes goes in a different direction than I thought it would in the second half. Like, it is very melancholy, sad, like just really is focused on these characters. It's character driven, focus on the relationship between all these characters and the family. I think you just get really invested in these characters and the family, and I highly recommend this. Like, this is not something I would typically pick up, but I'm so glad that I did, and it makes me want to pick up more like literary horror books that I typically would not. Put this on your TBRs because it's a good one. All right, and then my favorite book of the month, it's a 5 out of 5 star, was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I was so happy to have enjoyed this one so much, and it has now become one of my favorite romance books of all time. So if you've not read it yet, you really need to check it out. Whether you are a seasoned romance reader or a new romance reader, I think it would be perfect, which is nice because her last romance I didn't absolutely love, The Dead Romantics. This one is definitely better, just so you know, in case Dead Romantics didn't connect with you. This one's definitely better. We have our main character, Clementine, and she works in book publishing. So again, we have that draw of like following a bookish kind of character. And she grew up always traveling with her aunt. She has a really close relationship with her aunt, but then her aunt has passed away before this book starts, and she is currently living in her aunt's apartment, which her aunt always told her was magical and that it could like travel through time, either 7 years in the future or 7 years in the past. All of a sudden, it ends up transporting her 7 years in the past. It's when this man is staying there, Ewan, this guy who's an upcoming chef, and she just has this like bonding moment with him. Obviously, that's the romance. Then she goes back to present day and can't find him. And then all of a sudden, when she does bump into him because he's having a book published with her like publishing company, she finds he's a totally different person. He's not this like fun-loving, charismatic guy that he used to be, that she like fell in love with. He's now this like grumpy, whatever kind of guy. And so we're seeing these, you know, moments where she's with him in the past and they're building this relationship, and then the future we're trying to figure out like what went wrong, what happened, and they're reconnecting. And it was just perfect. Like, it had everything you'd want in a romance. It made me cry. There was, you know, a lot of development for both of these characters. They both go on a really great journey. There's the stuff with Clementine's aunt that really gets to you. It was just amazing. And I read this very quickly. Most of it I read on a flight. I just couldn't stop reading. So highly recommend. My favorite book of the month and probably one of my favorites of the year. So definitely gotta check it out. So that is my wrap up for June. I did not read as much as I wanted to, but I still definitely read some good books this month, which is great. Definitely let me know how your June reading month went. And if you've read any of these books, let's chat about it. All right, I hope you have a great rest of your summer. I will see you next time in my next video. Bye.